Welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. Today I'm speaking with John Noonan, lead strength and conditioning coach of GB Snowboard Cross and Alpine Ski. Hi guys, thanks for tuning into the Pace Performance Podcast. Today I've got another great guest online in John Noonan. John is the lead strength and conditioning coach for GB Snowboard Cross and Alpine Ski. I first came across John about 9 months ago when he was kind enough to reply to my email and give me half an hour of his time over the phone. Since then, I've seen him at the UKSCA conference, and anyone who was there, I'm sure would agree that his presentation was excellent. Really intriguing, the kind of stuff that he's doing with his PhD and his research. In this episode, we talk about his PhD and the kind of research that he's looking into. Also go into a lot of detail with the kind of freestyling aspect of his work with extreme sport athletes. He also goes into a bit of depth about his athletic capacity evaluation, which he's developed. And it kind of leads on nicely from the episode 14 with Darren Roberts talking about creating a performance playground. That's quite a nice link. I also mentioned his YouTube channel about 1 million times, so if you want to jump over to YouTube and have a look at the stuff that he's got on his YouTube channel, there's basically a snippet of the kind of things that he's doing. A lot of this kind of sexy stuff that he's doing, but in the episode he kind of goes into a bit of detail that the kind of core lifts that we're all used to seeing and missed out. And I hope you'll agree, it's another great episode that puts out some great information with guys working day in, day out with different athletes. So just before we get on the episode with John, I'd just like to say, if you are liking the now 15 episodes of the Pace Performance Podcast, please give us a rating and a review on iTunes if you've got 2 minutes of your time. If not, you can subscribe to the podcast again on iTunes, and that'll appear on your laptop or your phone, depending where you listen. You can also follow me on Twitter at Pacey Perform, which is where I will update people on new episodes and everything that's going on the podcast. And as I've mentioned before, all the previous episodes are on my website, which is paceyperformance.co.uk. And the last little thing before we actually get onto the episode is John mentions at the end that he's kind of open to people dropping an email and discussing what kind of things he's doing. So his email address is johnnoonan.teambss@gmail.com. So as he says in the episode, feel free to drop him an email or get in touch with him on Twitter. And last but not least, I just want to let you know about some seminars that a previous guest in the podcast are doing. Keir Wenham Flapp, who appeared on episode 2 when the podcast was very raw. He's coming over from Australia to do some seminars on career development. The dates are December the 13th at Results Inc. in Manchester, December the 15th at EPF Gym in Belfast, and December the 16th at Storm Fitness in Newcastle. So if you are wanting that kind of information, it'll be a great day. I know I'm gonna be there. And if you do want any more information on any of the seminars, you can pop over to Keir's website, which is rugbystrengthcoach.com, or you can get all the information on Twitter with his Twitter handle, which he mentioned in the podcast in episode 2. So that's a little shout out. Before I go any longer, enjoy the episode with John. Hi guys, thanks for tuning into the Pace Performance Podcast. Before I get going, I'd just like to welcome John Noonan to the podcast and thank him for giving up his time. Before we get going, I'd just like John to give us a little bit of a background on his education, his career, and where he is now. So, welcome to the podcast, John.
Hey, thanks, Rob. Listen, thanks for asking me to come on. Been really looking forward to this for some time. And background on me. Firstly, I started out as a personal trainer for many years in a number of gyms for about 5 years before I really started to think about working within strength and conditioning and how I was going to take that path. So I started working in football in around 2006 to 7. A couple of voluntary roles first with women's national Ghanaian team, and that was through the university link. And then I started also working with Hull City under-16s and some youth players, again, both voluntary, before I really took my first role at Scunthorpe United Football Club, and that was part of an internship on a master's programme after I'd finished my bachelor's. And I worked there for a year, and that was a fantastic experience. And it was really an opportunity through that experience. I met some of the staff at Chelsea Football Club and then moved there. And I spent just a bit longer than a season working mainly with the academy and under-18s, and then some work with the reserves before I moved then into rugby and started working with Leeds Carnegie Academy for about 2 years, and then the last 2 years of that 4 was working as the head S&C with the first team, before during that time, met actually a snowboard cross athlete, worked with her for a couple of years, and then it just kind of fell into place where I was at the end of the term at Leeds Carnegie. I thought I'm ready for a next challenge and something different, and an opportunity with now British Ski Snowboard, where I currently am, came around to work as the lead S&C, overarching a number of disciplines, but more recently funneling down to working with the Park and Pipe programme. So anything freestyle, ski and snowboard related is now what I do, and pretty much look after the design, implementation and delivery of the strength and conditioning.
Cool. So obviously there's a big jump from, well, what seems on the surface of it, a big jump from football and rugby to snowboard cross. What have you taken from your kind of more traditional sports into this world of extreme sports?
Yeah, it was really interesting and certainly a fun transition. And I guess I was fortunate at the time to still work in full-time in rugby and have the security of that role and get to know and understand another sport first before I jumped in with 2 feet. So, being able to work part-time with a snowboard cross athlete who, I'll be completely honest, on the surface of it, I knew nothing really about the sport other than what I'd seen briefly on YouTube and did some searches. I spent a lot of time listening first. I sat down with the athlete, asked the critical questions that, such as what's your competition schedule? What are the most demanding things for you? Where are you weakest? What do you think through training, through strength and conditioning that you've identified, perhaps that will make you a better athlete or the next world's best thing? And it was really asking those critical questions. But I guess the main 3 things that came from my experiences over time in football and rugby alike was I guess getting smarter as a coach and using my coaching experiences to develop and further manage relationships. So, I'm certainly not precious to admit that when I first came in, still quite a young S&C coach working across football and even to some point in my first year as head S&C at Leeds Carnegie Rugby, where I felt, okay, I'm a young coach also working with a young relative average age group of players. Because I have coach in my title, I need to kind of be authoritative. I need to maybe try and identify that if I can get the respect from the players, I can get more out of our work and our relationship. But, I maybe kind of operated naively to think that was going to be natural and inherent because I have a title. And it was only really until I dropped the idea that, I'm going to have respect already because I've got coach in my role, that actually I need to drop that and work harder on building a rapport with an athlete. And just, I think, spend more time getting to know each and every athlete I worked with. And then from that built a bigger bond between me and the actual group to make sure that they started to listen more and adhere to the work that was already taking place in the past. But I think they just bought into me as a person a bit more as well. So they're just working harder in general relationships. So that was probably the first thing. And then, of course, working across a number of speed and power sports has been able to give me the underpinning knowledge that I would use with snowboard cross and now with freestyle ski and snowboard, because they're the main kind of characteristics that are occurring often in the sport. So that knowledge has helped me along the way. And I think probably thirdly as well, that the jobs that I've had, particularly in Scunthorpe in football and, of course, with higher profile players in Chelsea and then more recently within Leeds Carnegie, you're dealing all the time with players with massive pathologies and huge contraindications in how they normally operate and what are they capable of in the realms of athletic performance. And perhaps in some of those jobs where I didn't have, a big sack of resources to play with, you have to get pretty smart and learn fast of how you're going to get the best from an athlete who perhaps can't move in a traditional way. And often, these guys as well, particularly in freestyle, because there's big trauma involved in what they do. And I think as Darren Roberts alluded to in the last podcast, there's massive stresses going on these guys. If they get it wrong, they're dancing on the knife edge of pulling off a trick, which is the world's best thing, or something which can be really catastrophic physically. So quite often you're faced, often with guys who've got pathologies, and you have to play around with those pathologies in order to get them functional enough to train, often on a weekly basis. So you learn quite a lot, I think, about functional anatomy and how you're going to get the best of that as an S&C coach. So,
yeah. So we spoke about before about your YouTube channel that's got lots of videos. You're doing certain things with some of your snowcross athletes and your kind of extreme sport athletes. But are they still doing the kind of more traditional gym strength and power work, or is it obviously more the kind of exciting stuff that you put on your YouTube channel?
No, for sure they do, and certainly not naive to think that we have to make everything extremely sport specific in order to make it relevant and transferable. So yeah, they're definitely doing the statutory strength lifts, which, because as we know, there's a massive body of research to suggest we have to work hard on strength in order to underpin power and the ability to augment that at different times in the season. So that is definitely a trend right throughout. I think the video you're referring to there, where I'm sort of crawling around and trying to look athletic, was an idea. I thought, well, how can I make an introduction to the group with something different and unique? Because particularly the main group of people I'm working with right now are very creative thinking and free-spirited athletes, and that they don't recognise or identify with traditional strength training. And I think quite often there's a culture that exists a bit like football, where if I'm to do traditional lifts, I'm going to become stiffened and bulky, and that's not going to be transferable to the sport. And, I do think perhaps in some ways, if that is ever applied within a program, then that can be the case. You do tend to lose, I think, this fluency and high level coordination in non-traditional movements, which, I'm referring, of course, to freestyle ski snowboard now. So the idea of the crawling circuit I developed was just watching stuff on YouTube. I think Mike Fetch was a guy who's talked about something called animals crawling. It'll come to me in a second. But there's this kind of series of animal crawling taking place, and I thought, well, it looks like kind of similar in the functional characteristics of if I can sometimes within a movement develop stiffness and then have good coordination and fluency and then bring more stiffness at a second point of the movement. It kind of carries across to the freedom of these athletes, where when they take off from a jump, there's a massive pulse of muscular force and stiffness that occurs to get off and get amplitude so they can have the airtime, but then really cool fluency in movement where there's a lack of stiffness taking place, and they coordinate and they work with the momentum that's carrying them through and the other, gravitational muscular forces that occur. But when they land again, they have to bring huge levels of stiffness. So appreciably, the crawling, they're not on their feet, which is probably the closest transfer you could have. But there is a lot of trunk and upper body structural work going on, big time and attention and stuff. So actually, after using it and asking some of the freestyle guys, we've tended to use that more as a warm-up now than a training stimulus. But it's different, and it's probably a little bit out there in its thinking, but it's having some effect, if you're with me,
Yeah, I mean, I know it's coming more popular in your traditional sports. I mean, I know a couple of guys in football who are using it with their academy. I don't know if you were using it while you were at Scunny or at Chelsea, but would you take that back if you got another role in football or rugby? Would you kind of use that with them?
Yeah, well, do you know what this is? I guess to get comfortable with something before you start trying to introduce it into a wider program, that was something I used a lot at my time in Leeds Carnegie, more so previously than football. I dabbled in one or two things, but they look at you sideways, think, what is this guy talking about? Why am I doing a travelling Spider-Man?
Yeah.
What the hell is an inchworm cobra? And then when you start to put those things in rhythmical gorilla crawls and bear crawls with then transitions, they think, this guy's not on my wavelength. I cannot do this. And actually, I would pull that sort of different exercises and skills out when I needed to maybe bring a bit more of a jovial, I guess, feel to the atmosphere. So we do it a lot in warm-ups, and the lads would rip the piece out of me for just cocking about and looking an idiot. But they'd have a go of it, and some of them are really functional and they can see the relevance of it. And all right, if I maybe be a bit more stable here, have more range at this hip joint, then I can actually see the benefit, and I feel better when I go out to my practice. So it was really playing around with it at first in warm-ups that it started to become true practice for me now, and seeing a relevance, and I guess being careful and smarter of where I would choose for that intervention to come in.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, you didn't mention your in your education and stuff. You didn't mention your PhD. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your research and kind of your PhD as a whole?
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So my current role right now is really juggling 2 full-time efforts with lead S&C with BSS, and then also the PhD. So the PhD we're looking to use to better evidence our understanding of the sport of freestyle. So what the demands are for the sport, because quite frankly, nobody really knows what's going on the snow right now. If people do, they're certainly not sharing that information. So we're trying to evidence better what are the functional demands going through athletes on snow. And then through that, if we can appreciate what demands are taking place, then we know how to train these guys, and then hopefully we can bridge the gap and have greater transfer in training because we understand what we're training for. So it's a longer term process. So it's, at the moment, there's a couple of studies which we're still building the semantics around, but probably for the most part, we're going to look at measuring muscular force, joint kinematics, and also muscle activity whilst they're on the snowboard, predominantly landing from a height with and without technical challenges, so we can try and recreate the environmental demands of what's actually happening in snow. And believe it or not, I've tried and failed with a few wearable technologies recently to try and get out on snow and collect something that's really realistic and relevant, but it's extremely difficult to do so with affordable technologies and often stuff that's available on the market. It becomes a real problem for you to try and bring something applied to your practice. So we're probably going to start off in the lab for the most part and try and build something relevant, and then probably go into an indoor snow dome, and then maybe thirdly do some kind of training intervention and measure how close that training intervention, such as maybe a plyometric drill, can mirror the demands and have a transfer in training practice.
That sounds really interesting. Just one question: do you ever get on the board yourself and have a little bash?
I can't snowboard. I can ski.
Nice.
I'm reasonably competent. It's like, I guess when you're competent enough, you're gliding around, you're enjoying it. I get a bit kamikaze. I try to do a few jumps, but I nail myself every time. So I need to sort of rein it in. But snowboarding probably is the next thing I need to get into, just so I can appreciate what the riders do a bit more.
Yeah,
but it's just really cool, right? I'm very lucky.
Yeah, it sounds the coolest job in the world.
It's not bad. It really isn't bad. We've got a few trips coming up this year, and for me, it's really important time to be able to use that and build a rapport and relationships with the group, and I guess just have a better appreciation for what's going on. Because unfortunately, like I maybe thought when I first came in, you ain't going to walk into an environment and find the athletes are there at a certain time, and you can have hands-on practice. So in my role right now, the athletes are all over the country. So when they're in the UK, which is maybe 3 to 5 months out of the year, it's about travelling to them and maximising contact time. And then the rest of the time is distance managing when they're away. But yeah, I think the trips this year are going to be extremely useful to try and build a bigger impression of what's going on.
Yeah, of course. I mean, just going back to I haven't been stalking your YouTube channel. I don't get any financial gain out of bigging it up, but some of your YouTube clips, you kind of show them doing lots of gymnastics kind of movements. How important is it to give these guys kind of the freedom to express themselves like they would in a competition doing whatever they're doing?
Yeah, massively. One of the things I've certainly had to be aware of in order for me to have a greater benefit as an S&C is what training is currently taking place within this culture. And of course, they're spending massive amount of time refining their craft by being on the board. These guys are hanging out with friends every single day and simply often the best in the world just because the level of practice they're bringing to it. And for the most part, when they can't get abroad, which is extremely valuable, they're either in the snow dome or they're in the skate park or they're going to some kind of free running centre because they see the transfer of these less traditional movement skills in a very non-traditional movement perspective and how that can move across to the board. So these guys will, for the most part, train their aerial awareness in the gymnastics hall and the trampolines. I'll then try and bring some relevance and specificity to different challenges with jump takeoff and jump landing. So we're constantly bringing it back to their jumping and landing skills, because not that it gets missed, but it's a really, really effective skill transfer if you can improve their motor control, particularly in deceleration, because that's where we're seeing the biggest kind of trauma taking place. If they get it wrong, if their skill's wrong, they come in, and that's where we're seeing injuries occur. So if we can limit the occurrence of injuries, then of course they can be on the board a lot more and just get better as athletes. But, for the most part, it's how I kind of put a recipe together with coaching is to figure out what are the most effective training modalities out there that they currently engage in, and then what's missing and what do I need to bring in. So that might be the more traditional strength training, but we'll package that in a manner which is not identifiable as normal strength training. It's, I think as David Joyce alluded to in his book, I think he now looks upon strength training as resistance training with coordination, and it's very important that I think we sell that to a non-traditional training group in order for them to engage in it. But for the most part, it's inviting them to engage in it, and it's definitely an athlete-led process. It's not over-instructional and certainly not over-directional. So they're invited to. It sounds crazy for some S&Cs perhaps, but they're invited to engage in a practice. We provide rationale for that practice, and we acknowledge their feelings and perspectives along the way, and provide opportunities for independence within it, and make sure we've got continual feedback on their adherence with it. And I think ultimately, as an S&C, often we have to avoid controlling behaviours and funnel them down a path they're not comfortable with, and invite their creative involvement in the practice so that we can get an improved outcome. And I think if you look at the self-determination theory, which is something I alluded to when I spoke at the UKSAA earlier this year, that's an underpinning schematic which, if we can understand someone's motivation, or intrinsic motivation, more to be determined for an activity through hopefully different extrinsic factors such as risk and reward, and why they should spend more time or less engaging in a certain type of activity, we can hopefully make them more self-determined and improve their practice. And there's been some research done on that, and I think the leading authors in the area are Decky and Ryan, and I'd really encourage anyone to go and read that stuff. But we've really inherited this practice, particularly within performance training, because it's taking place within their skills training. So for me to have an effect, I have to mirror the environment and the coaching, I think, language that's been used, and the direction they take with the technical work. And then they're therefore, I think, very comfortable and happy to get on board with what we're doing S&C.
So can that freedom be transferred across, just going back to your experience in other sports, can that freedom be transferred to kind of more a group traditional team settings, or is that just a recipe for disaster?
Yeah, God, goodness, I think that's an incredibly difficult balance to find, and it probably comes down to being smart as a coach to recognise the diversity of character you've got in front of you as a group, and also what you're required to do and what you're expected to do as an S&C coach. So you may have expectations where a coach wants certainly, very strong prescriptive strength training to be done. And of course, we know if we can, I think, manage the stimulus, we can hopefully control the outcome. But, and often what I tried to do, and I think what made me stronger as a coach within rugby was allow the athlete in front of me, if I felt they were experienced enough and they were switched into the activity, that these are your options in order to get the same outcome. Which one is going to get us there quickest, and also which one will you enjoy doing more? And I think that joined respect and joined up thinking between the two of us, and hopefully that kind of spread between the group, where they came in and they went, I'm not going to duck out from this activity. I can't do cleans today. All right, fine. There's other ways for us to get this done. And it's having, I think, that respect and appreciation that they could come in, and I wasn't going to come down and say, well, if you ain't doing cleans today, go off and see the physio, because for whatever reason you've picked up a niggle at the weekend. I'm not having you in the gym doing soft training. I want you doing the cleans. I think that environment, it kills your relationship with the athlete. And I think if you're going to get maximum buy-in, you have to be very aware and have good empathy as a coach with the athlete.
I mean, just milking the kind of the freedom in the training topic, but with that freedom becomes maybe a difficulty to quantify and measure what they're actually doing.
Yeah.
How hard is it for you to measure what these guys are doing? And is it actually required from the guys, obviously, above yourself?
We're taking it into freestyle ski and snowboard as an example, I said earlier on, we have no idea on the demands of the sport currently going through in competition and in practice in some ways. We can of course make an effort to measure, how often they're getting on snow, what's the volume of tricks done, of the number of tricks that they tried to execute, what were, should we say, in a traffic-like system, their red level tricks, the hardest tricks they would execute, which, if they get wrong, is going to bring the most trauma and risk. The green tricks they can do all day in their sleep, and that's where they're competent and live. So we understand there's maybe a change in intensity if we look at the trick difficulty. But then, between the tricks, how many tricks did they successfully land and how many did they fail? And that is a form, I guess, of monitoring their technical work. But trying to get an athlete to buy into filling out pieces of paper, maybe getting on their laptop on an evening and filling out quantifiable values, which for me may be really useful. Actually, in the grand scheme of things, what am I going to do with that other than at the end of the season go, okay, well, this athlete did X, Y, Z, but I've still got the same athlete in front of me. How valuable is that information if it's retrospective? So if we're going to be effective with our practice and day to day, and this is maybe the weakness of me managing an athlete abroad sits in that because I'm not there, how much influence can you have? But again, I think that comes back to the relationship you build with the athlete and the coaches. So they're continually reinforcing things like, all right, look, athlete number one, you're going to need, sounds like it's like a robot I'm calling it, but you're going to need to do your prehab before you go out on snow because, as John's identified, this is really important to reduce your risk when you're on snow. So do your mobility exercises, do your activation stuff, and hopefully you'll train better. And inevitably when they engage in that process, we eventually find them in it. But I'm digressing some, but going back to, I guess, your question, within the environment we sit, it's very difficult to quantify what's going on. But I think in some ways, without being stifling, we have to make some strides toward understanding what our athletes are doing more in order to kind of break the, not break the practice, but improve what they're currently doing. Because if I don't understand the volume going through an athlete, and let's say they're continually picking up an injury, there might be a training-induced an issue, an overtraining-related issue going on. But if I can't assess that, and often values and numbers will back that up, I'm going to have to use my coaching brain and just through question finding and answering to figure out, is what they're doing conducive to the wider picture of him being able to medal in 4 years' time, if this is what we're seeing every single year. So I think I'm jumping around, but it's very difficult to get numbers on these guys. So I'm not certainly going to get too besotted with trying to pick this up because I think we can get a bit too number-based and orientated as coaches these days. And in some ways it works, but I think we have to have a good balance between, what's feasible, what do you really need to do, and what's going to improve your practice as a coach. What do you really need? And I think ultimately that comes down to the relationship with the athlete and the coach, and being honest with each other.
I mean, just going on to the kind of the monitoring side of things, something that's really interests me. Again, milking the YouTube videos, but you demonstrate some of the athletic capacity evaluation that you put your guys through. Do you just want to talk to us a little bit about that kind of process and how you came to devise that evaluation? Okay,
yeah. So that was something it was an idea that I evolved upon, which was already set in play really from our current performance director, Paddy Mortimer. And this was really for the benefit of alpine ski. We started on this road because for an athlete to jump from what am I trying to say? To go from a less level of support from within the service and the system from coach to athlete, they have to be able to pass certain technical and physical criteria. Up until this point, it's been completely, if you're going to get on the team as a GB athlete, you have to pass a technical assessment. And, the coach would get them on an indoor snow slope or out on the piste somewhere and say, right, if you can do X, Y, Z, you're good enough and competent enough to be a team member. The problem is, we're getting athletes perhaps from a talent pool which maybe weren't physically ready at that time to join the team, and broke down early because they weren't physically developed enough in certain areas, or actually you could see pure physical limitations right on the face of it, and yet they were brought into the team, and it really was their physical or their lack of physical development at a younger age that's meant they weren't able to cash the checks later in their career even if they do get very good technically. So quite often we found athletes were there by default and not by design. So the reason for the battery of assessments was to be able to quantify how good somebody is physically in a certain area, which of course transfers to the skill, and essentially grade their performance within it. So we used it as a blanket assessment to share with other regional ski coaches and ski systems, and to invite their athletes to come in and be evaluated and create an athlete profile and not a test. And we say the word evaluation and profile because I think, again, within testing, perhaps we can be a bit besotted with the idea that this is a test, these are our benchmarks for the test, you have to hit this level for the test in order to be competent and considered competent. Whereas actually the test should be used to gauge a profile on the athlete, and then, of course, we come in later and use interventions to improve their profile, their physical profile. So we're trying to change, I think, the identity of a test and coaches getting hung up on testing, but to say, well, you've got this range of athletes in front of you. What is their profile, and how close can they get to the end of, right, we understand you need to have X, Y, Z skills to be a really good skier, for example. So it's a grading tool, essentially.
So just give us a couple of examples of the kind of stuff that's in there. Obviously, there's like, I don't know if it compares, doing it a disservice, but you've obviously got the kind of FMS where you've got the overhead squat, your lunge, that type of thing. What kind of things are you looking for?
Yeah, so now you're testing my memory. There's 7 movements in the pathway, and we've got things on there such as a crossover hop test. So there's a strong body of evidence to show that you may be more risk of, let's say, a knee injury, or as an example, ACL injury, which of course is very common in skiers. That if you've got a big discrepancy and asymmetry in score left to right side, then you may be more at risk versus another athlete who has got a closer asymmetry. So that's one of the assessments we use for, if you will, screening an injury risk of an athlete. There's a hexagonal jump in there, so it's a quick speed change of direction, jumping around a hexagon shape essentially 3 times. So there's a reactive plyometric component involved in there, but also coordination, which does mirror in some ways the skiing movements that they'll go through on the piste when they're going through slalom. There's other things such as a chin test, which doesn't probably carry massive relevance to, doesn't look like a skiing movement, but we understand that in their start, when they're pulling off in order to go down the run, they're trying to generate as much speed as early as possible to have momentum and speed for their time. So if they can push off best and they're using the upper body to achieve that as well as the lower, there's clearly important traits there that carry over. And also when these guys land, there's often huge impact injuries which will occur at the shoulder. You get a sublux joint or something taking place like that. So if we can make them stronger on the shoulder girdle again, you can hopefully reduce the risk of shoulder injuries and also improve your neck strength, which of course the neck is very active in the chin too, isometrically, and that may lead in some way to try and strengthen the neck to reduce concussions. So that's just 3 examples there. There's 7 different movements, which in some way you could find a relationship to the world of skiing and how practical is that. But what we've actually been able to do is continue to use these battery of movements to screen just general athletic competence. So we're not trying to get too hung up on what's the score out of 3, maybe such as an FMS, but collect a body of evidence from all our athletes in different disciplines and share that information across the disciplines to figure out what kind of athletes, what athletes are looking like physically when they come in at the door, let's say 13, 14. And if we're going to make them the world's next best thing, how are we going to get them there? What have we got to do physically, and how does that link into their skills training?
I mean, I know we chatted before, and I think you started off with quite a broad number of athletes from different snow sports, and you've kind of whittled it down to a couple of focuses. But across the different sports, what are the kind of similarities and differences? Because they obviously all jump, they all land, but are they pretty similar, or are you kind of defining them quite rigidly?
I guess the guys that I've had contact with, so when I first came in, it was alpine ski, snowboard cross, some carryover with ski cross, but not so much. And then now more for sure, my role really is taken with the freestyle guys, but I still work with the snowboard cross group too. And I guess the major difference between those two, and if you were to bring alpine ski into the mix was you've got gravitational athletes. So, of course, the freestyle do the tricks, and there's a big performance need to be able to do high level skills in the air, because that's how their sport is graded. It's technical proficiency. And then you've got the guys who stay on land, so that they're more speed emphasis in what they do. So there's a speed time to how fast can you get down the piste, and we'll compare that time to the next athlete. So you've got gravity, and then you've got speed races, and they're the two major differences. But kind of the thing that joins the both of them, there are always occasions where there's air time followed by force absorption, force reduction. And one of the biggest things that we're trying to do when we meet these athletes is improve their functional movement and control, carrying closer to the technical demands of the sport, but making sure we minimize energy leaks where possible so they can maximize speed on the snow. Because if a racer is losing speed when he turns a corner because he can't control his frame as he turns around a gate, then he's clearly losing speed further down the course. And for a freestyle guy who has to jump, if when he comes into his landing off a kicker and he's got two more kickers ahead of him where he's got to do similar tricks to get off and make points for the style of tricks, if he loses speed on each landing, then of course he's losing ground momentum and therefore air time owing to the next trick. So inevitably it sounds pretty simple, but making sure our guys jump and land extremely well is often where we're starting.
Cool. I mean, I've kept you for nearly 32 minutes, so I know we're just going to round it up a little bit, but I know you did the UKSA conference, which I don't think I told you was a brilliant presentation. Everyone kind of I was sat with was absolutely buzzing off it at the end.
Oh, thanks very much.
No worries. But what other events have you got coming up? Kind of how can people keep up to date with your work, social media, etc.?
Yeah, so I'm really excited. I'm actually going to Australia on November 3rd to present at the Australian Strength and Conditioning annual conference too. Nice. So I can't wait for that. And it's similar line, we're going to present the research that we're currently looking at and how we're working with these athletes and some of the challenges that we face. So that's going to be really cool. And then, of course, where possible, I try and get out and work with the athletes on Pacey. So we're sharing some of that information now and again on Twitter and just talking about what we're doing. And then, of course, we're still early days within the PhD, but we're making some decent strides now. So hopefully little pockets of research and evidence will start to appear over time. So anyone can stay in touch through Twitter handle there, which is John_M_Noonan. And just anyone's interested to get in touch then. And of course, drop me an email. I'm more than happy for you to share that, Rob. I'm happy to chat to anybody.
Yeah, happy days. And the world famous YouTube channel's on there as well, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. I think when I get a bit of time, I try and drop a crazy video or two. That's pretty fun. Yeah,
that's cool. Right, mate. I'll say see you later. And just last but not least, thanks for giving up for half an hour of your time. Really appreciate it. And I'll speak to you soon.
No problem. Thanks for having us, Rob. It's been really great. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks a lot, mate. I'll speak to you later.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for tuning into the Pace Performance Podcast. I'm sure you'll agree the little chat with John Noonan was really interesting with such a unique population that he's working with. If you want to keep up to date with everything on the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes and give us a rating and review. If you haven't got iTunes, you can listen on my website, which is paceperformance.co.uk. Or you can just follow me on Twitter and I will keep you up to date with everything that's going on the podcast. Thanks again for listening, and I'll check you in the next episode.